Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Progressive Bitcoiner. I'm your host, Trey Walsh, and today we have on the show Stacie Waleyko. And Stacey joins me to talk about Bitcoin and open source development and education, which she has really tapped into. And this was a really fun conversation. We get into Stacey's Bitcoin dev work, open source work. We get into education. We talk about recent developments in privacy tools and privacy regulation that we've been seeing with different things through Samurai and a bunch of other things for open source tools and privacy tech that has been a little bit under attack in terms of the regulatory environment. We talk about the importance of these things. We talk about what is privacy and how is it important. We talk about Bitcoin open source development. We talk about the need for open source development. We talk about everyone's favorite buzzword in Bitcoin right now, Ossify, and what does ossification mean? Is it even applicable to Bitcoin and the things we're talking about? So this was a really great conversation that I know you all are going to love. Whether you're technical or not, Stacey is really, really good at explaining really complicated things in really simple and easily digestible ways, and also talking about Bitcoin's security model and why Bitcoin is just simply one of the best in terms of security and the conservative nature of the protocol and why it's stuck around for as long as it's had. So this is a really important conversation that I hope you all will share very widely as well. And I want to thank Stacey for coming on the show. It was great to talk with another Boston person on the show. So that was really fun. Does a lot of work with Boston Bit Devs, MIT, and things like that. So a lot of proud Boston Bitcoiners that'll be listening to this and tuning in as well. So thanks again, Stacey, for coming on. And also, I want to start with this episode. We have new shout outs that I posted on nostr recently. So I'll be posting when I'm recording with a certain guest and then give folks the opportunity to zap and send Bitcoin and sats on nostr, which is the new social media protocol that I've talked about many times on the show before. Kind of like Twitter, but it's decentralized. It's much, much better. So we have a profile over on nostr that you can find in our show notes. And I've encouraged people that if you zap those posts, the top 3 zaps, I will read off for our shows. So we're going to kick that off today. And I encourage people too, you can leave comments, appropriate. I'm going to be reading them on air here. But you can send comments with your zaps and things like that. So I want to give a shout out to Reed sending 2,100 sats through that post, Bitcoin Attorney, and the Daniel as well with 300 and 212. Those are our top zaps, and I think we can keep getting better from there. I know this was new, and we're still building our following over on nostr. So I want to give shout outs to Reed, Bitcoin Attorney, and the Daniel from our team over on nostr for participating in that and also asking great questions, which you'll hear in this episode. A question from Daniel and a couple of others were brought up on this episode as well. So you'll get the opportunity to ask questions via those posts. So be sure to follow us on nostr if you haven't already. You can check out nostr on Primal, on Damus. There's so many great apps, but you can check out our profile in the show notes and give us a follow there so that you can stay notified of when we post about guests we're going to be speaking to, and gives you a chance to leave remarks if you want to ask a question, as well as zaps to be read, live on our shows when we air them. So thanks for those that are participating, and thanks for letting me do this. All right, I'll let you get to the episode now. As always, you can hit me up in our Telegram group, which is also in the show notes. It's a public Telegram group to chat about the episode and so much more. And you can also reach me at hello@progressivebitcoiner.com. All right, we'll see you again next week. Hey, Stacey, welcome to the Progressive Bitcoiner. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Trey. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat with you.
Yeah, me as well. We were just talking. I sent you over a lot of questions, a lot of things to go over, which I'm super excited to do. The timing of everything seems really ripe. There's just so much going on, I think, for us to talk about. But before we jump into this list of questions and conversation, do you want to introduce yourself to people who might not know who you are and what you do and what you like to focus on?
Yeah, sure. So hi, everyone. My name is Stacie Waleyko. I often go by the nickname Stacie on Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff. I am a software engineer by trade. My Bitcoin story starts in probably about 2016. The ad tech company I was working for laid off the entire engineering team, and just by chance, I ended up finding my next role at a startup with a former colleague that was working on permissioned ledgers, the distributed ledger technology space, DLT is what they called it. And we were not tracking tomatoes on the blockchain, but we were doing things that were suspiciously similar to it. And I found it very hard to understand the hype around blockchain technology, specifically how it was different from a distributed database or a linked list with some cryptography built in. And so I decided I need to take a look at Bitcoin because it's the reference implementation of a blockchain. If I can't understand what a blockchain is in the context of Bitcoin, then I really don't know what I'm doing. So as we all know, the rabbit hole for Bitcoin goes really deep. And this is where my story kind of sounds a lot like everyone else's. The more I looked into Bitcoin, the more questions I had. And I remember at the time, there was only one book out there. It was the Bitcoin Standard. I devoured it. I loved learning about the economic and the game theory side of things because that's something that I just have never had a lot of exposure to. I loved learning about the history of money, about how it worked. And then I think there were also 2 podcasts at the time that I would listen to every morning to get ready. It was Noted with Pierre Rochard and Michael Goldstein and Tales from the Crypt, which we now know as TFTC. So at some point, though, I could kind of realize I'm never coming out of this Bitcoin world. I don't want to. So actually on January 3rd, 2019, which is the 10-year anniversary of the Genesis block, I handed in my resignation letter. I had no plan. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I knew it had to be in Bitcoin. And I got really lucky. I ended up landing a role at a company called Casa, which does a multi-sig offering. And I was working on the backend systems over there for quite a while. And then about 2 years ago, I took another leap into the unknown into open source Bitcoin, which has been really fun. And that's what I've been doing since then. However, since June, I've actually been on maternity leave because I just had my second son. He finally started sleeping through the night. So I have a little bit more time here and there, but it's definitely that time constraint is also impacting the types of projects that I pick to work on right now, because I don't, at most, it's 2 hours a night to do that. And also every single one of my basic needs. Yeah.
Shout out to the moms working on Bitcoin. Congrats. And that's super cool. And that's really fun. And so beautiful to be able to do that and then work on this permissionless open protocol. I love it. That's really cool. Yeah, there's so many different types of people working on Bitcoin. That's so cool. I wanted to ask a quick follow-up to that. In terms of your Bitcoin work, can you talk to people a little bit about the type of thing that you're attracted to in terms of the open source work with Bitcoin? So leaving a more structured, I guess structured-ish environment with Casa for working for a company and then focusing on open source work. If there's someone that's listening that is a developer interested in this work, what does that even look like for the average person? Okay, I'm going to work on Bitcoin. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, that can mean a lot of things, especially today. There was once a time when you would say, I'm working on Bitcoin, and that only meant Bitcoin Core. But today, that's not the case. There's so many open source projects out there, and there's so many open source projects that become startups. You really have a wonderful array of different kinds of projects that you want to choose. For me personally, lately, it's been a lot about education. When I first came into this space, there was just not a lot of structured education. I'm a very good student. I'm really good with that kind of learning environment. And I mean, I will say that Bitcoin has taught me how to think outside the box, ask questions, trust my own opinion if I've done the research instead of waiting for someone to tell me what to do and how to do it. But having said that, I really could have benefited from more material when I was trying to learn how to code Bitcoin code. So I try to create stuff that is would have been useful to Stacey 5 years ago. So one of the things I've done is an interactive tutorial where you just get to learn about the basics in Bitcoin. And I think too, there's a really good opportunity in this space to there's actually a lot of really high quality technical education, especially because the deeper you go into it, you just kind of become one with it. You just start reading the mailing list, you start reading Delving Bitcoin, you start listening to the OpTech spaces and the newsletter and stuff, and then you're part of it. But I think for everyone outside of that, I think we need a little bit more of just an easy ramp into the more technical topics in Bitcoin. And also, if you started working in Bitcoin 10 years ago, you've watched it evolve. You've watched transaction types go from like, here we have SegWit or normal transactions, and now we have SegWit ones, and now we have Taproot ones. And for somebody to have to learn all of that at once, that's just throwing them off the deep end. So for me, I really like exploring that tension between accuracy and being concise. And I do acknowledge that with several things I've done, like I've purposely simplified it because I don't feel like it does the reader a service to throw everything at them at once. Does that kind of answer? Like I quit.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, you know, your website and even GitHub and things like that will be in the show notes for folks, but your website is really cool. I even tried out I don't know if this is what you were alluding to, the like interactive like coding segment. Okay, enter this command. Enter that was pretty cool. I hadn't seen it like that. I mean, I've done some, and what's so funny, I've mentioned this story I think on this podcast before. When I first got into Bitcoin, it was funny where I think I first bought on Coinbase, and this was like early 2021. And then I bought some, and then I remember being a bit paranoid. I'm like, okay, I want to learn how to like really like hold this right and do it. So I almost like, I don't know, maybe a lot of people do this as well, because some people are afraid, oh, they'll just leave it on Coinbase forever or whatever. I was actually really like, oh my gosh, I don't want this to be lost. So I jumped on like Reddit. I was like, I need to understand how to run a Lightning node. I need to understand how to like hold this and like do all these crazy things like right away. I was like messaging random people on Reddit when like my Raspberry Pi like crashed, and I was like, what do I do? And it wasn't like a lot of funds that I was playing with, but I was just trying to figure out. And also, if you're going to play with stuff and play around with Bitcoin, make sure it's small amounts and whatever, adding that. But I was really just like, so I was doing, they were like sending me like, you know, this was even before like ChatGPT, AI, and different implementations of making it easier to even do basic coding for these things. And I do not have a technical background. I like studied sociology, like I'm a humanitarian or humanities kid. And so all of this was like so overwhelming. So going back to that was really fun and like kind of cool just to see what are the basics of like creating keys and what does that look like and signatures. I thought that was really cool on your website. But I'd love for you to tell people, and I encourage people to click around on your site as well, where some of the ideas for are they Zines, the different educational materials as well, like those on the website. I thought that was really cool in terms of your education focus.
I appreciate that. And I will say, like, good on you for just going out there and trying everything that you possibly could, even though you were experimenting with mainnet funds. Because I think it's just scary to realize that you have this much power. It is like cash, like digital cash. Like once you send it somewhere, it's not coming back for whatever reason at all. And that's part of like one of the beautiful things about Bitcoin. But there's also just a lot of, in the crypto space, there's a lot of misinformation and people that don't have the best intentions. And so remember when Bcash came out and the Bitcoin subreddit versus the BTC subreddit, like one's for Bitcoin Cash and one isn't, like that's so confusing to a newcomer. So I applaud you for getting this far, and now you're teaching other people about it. The zines on my website, so it's short for magazine, which it's actually not a new concept. It's new to me, but it's a very like punk kind of movement where people just create little booklets about whatever they want. The fact that it's not perfect is kind of part of the charm, but there's so much to learn about in the Bitcoin space right now. And one of the beautiful things is that you can specialize in a certain area now. You can specialize in wallet development. You can specialize in mining. You can specialize in peer-to-peer networking. And as we see more of that, it becomes a little overwhelming to learn about different areas. So recently, I decided I didn't know anything about Stratum, and I didn't know anything about Stratum V2. And so I figured let's figure this out. And so I loved doing the research on it. And then when I was done with that, I wanted to share with others what I had learned and kind of tell it from my perspective. And it also is really fun because I get to speak with the creators and say to them, hey, like, I would love to give you some free marketing. I learned about your project. I really like it. Can you check this and tell me like if it sounds correct to you? So having that connection with them is also really nice. But yeah, I wish I had one upstairs with me. They are these printable booklets. What you do is you print them on a piece of paper, front and back, and then you cut them in half, and then you fold them, and then you take it off and read. And something too that I noticed with myself is if I am reading something on the internet, and I don't know what a word means, I'll look up that word, and then that word will remind me of something else. And then we'll click around, and then suddenly I'm on nostr, not doing what I originally thought I was supposed to be doing. So I kind of like the whole like tangibility of just holding a piece of paper. It's technically 8 pages, but the first and last are just title and end page. That's a very like closed domain. Like once you read it, you've read it, and you can move on. You can go like do more research if you want, or you can say like, I feel like I learned enough, and that can be it.
Yeah, that's very cool. I thought the format was really cool too, especially, when people think of technical things like that. Like you said, you get lost on some website, or you get lost in GitHub, or you get lost somewhere. Whereas having that physical presence for a technical component is really cool, and it's really fun. I really like that. Everyone's going to make fun of me. I already know it because I said Zine and you're like Zine.
Oh,
so
yeah.
just calling that out there, calling that out there for everyone who's going to like clip that and like, send me messages. So
I appreciate that though, because I put on the header of the website that it's like magazine without the MAGA, and then someone on Stacker News was like, "Oh, like she's really liberal," and like no, it's actually because my son loves the movie Cars, and Larry the Cable Guy's character is a tow truck named Mater, and he goes like, "My name's Mater." Like tow mater without the tut, and that lives rent free in my head. I don't know why, and so I figured. But I also figured, like, I don't think everyone knows what the word zine is. So, thank you for admitting that you didn't know how to pronounce it. And I'm not going to.
Hey, for people, well, people will hear it now. I'm not going to clip it. Like Damien, do not clip that. Show my mistakes to the world. Yeah, and I know friends that put out others that's just so funny. So moving along outside of the mistake that I've made, what do you think is one of the biggest challenges for you? So obviously you have a background in this, a background in software development. What for you is something that you feel is kind of easier comes naturally to you with working in the Bitcoin ecosystem or looking at these open source projects? And what's something that you think is challenging? Like how is Bitcoin and working on Bitcoin projects different from other open source projects or other things that you've studied and things like that? Like where are the similarities and where are the new challenges?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm really, not really, but I'm relatively new to just open source in general. Bitcoin is the first open source thing that I've ever worked on. And the deeper I got down the Bitcoin stack, though, the more pleased I was to see similarities with development in open source and in industry. The standards, specifically in Bitcoin Core, are extremely high, and truly some of the best engineers I've ever seen are the ones in the Bitcoin Core code base. And that felt good after a while, because I did feel like an outsider in the beginning. Like we have some contributors in Bitcoin Core who have been doing this since they were in high school. And that's certainly not the case for me. So I kind of felt like I was in a weird spot for a while too. I was like, I'm not an open source dev, but like I don't work in industry, and like the Bitcoin industry at the time was like so super small. But now that I've been in it just does feel more familiar. One of the most challenging things I will say though is that the length of the development cycles in Bitcoin is extremely long. I wouldn't call myself a core developer, but I have experience going through the core code base. I have an open PR. It's now been passed on to someone else for something called GetNet Message Stats, which is a new RPC that will get you different message statistics broken down by like number of bytes, number of messages, network type, message type. It's actually really, really cool. But there's a lot of people working on a lot of different things. So it is, it's currently kind of like still open. But that is one thing I want to talk about, is that so the development cycles in Bitcoin are just long in that when you want to propose a change to Bitcoin Core, you need to open what is called a pull request or a PR. And a PR is basically additional code that you want to add to the code base. It could be changes to the existing code, or it could be code that you propose to remove. So any changes you want to make, you make a PR. And what happens is it's very normal for PRs in Bitcoin Core to sit there for 6 months, 1 year, several years. It's totally normal. And I think for somebody coming from the startup world, that can be really shocking and unbearable and smothering. And ironically, I would actually compare the pace of this development to that of government work, which is something that I've also done. But it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's actually because the developers are very deliberate. They're very risk averse. They understand the gigantic responsibility that is securing the code for a billion-dollar industry at this point, or I'm not sure the exact number. And so, like, okay, the development cycles are long, but what does that really mean? It means you do a whole bunch of work to open up a PR. First, you have to find an idea that's worth implementing. Then you have to implement it to the extremely high coding standards of Bitcoin Core, which is written in C++, which is not like the easiest language to work in. And then you have to make sure that you didn't break anything else along the way, because the code base is very, very big. And then after you do all that, you have to like hope or make sure or connect with people to see that like you're not touching stuff that someone else is working on for like different reasons possibly. And if you do, you have to go and resolve that conflict. So you do all that, and it's very rewarding. But you open your PR, and sometimes it's just crickets. Like it just sits there, and it could be a great PR, it could be a great idea. But like the fact is, so many people are working on so many different things. Bitcoin Core, just like the network, is decentralized. There's no engineering manager. There's no VP of engineering. There's no CTO to tell you this is what we're working on, this is when we're working on it, and this is how we're working on it. In order for anything to happen in Bitcoin Core, it needs to have an overwhelmingly large amount of consensus for it to be pushed through. So what I'm getting at is there's actually like an emotional weight to it that will wear on you over time if you don't figure out how to handle it. And my advice, if you want to succeed, is first, you need to learn how to like handle that weight. And John Adek, who's a core contributor and also now a Bit editor, he has a great blog post on how to review a PR in Bitcoin Core. And he actually recommends that for every PR that you open, you should be reviewing 5 to 15 other PRs, which is like 5 to 15 times the amount, which is kind of crazy. But it oftentimes people will return the favor as like a thank you for reviewing their work. And then the other thing that is really it's kind of hard to learn, but once you get it, it's actually a really good thing, is that critical feedback is much better than no feedback at all. And it's actually an honor to have somebody tear your PR apart for the sake of trying to help it become better. And there's different ways to go about it. Some people are a little bit more considerate than others, but at the end of the day, like this person took time out of their schedule. They gave you resources, they gave you brain cycles to help you on what you're trying to accomplish. And so I think that, like I was talking about how Bitcoin's helped me in terms of personal growth, like that's an example. It's very different from industry, but it's a good thing.
Yeah, I think you did a good job summarizing a really complex thing for our, for me, for our non-technical audience, things like that. It kind of reminds me of the little cartoons of like how a bill becomes a law and like breaking it down. That would be really cool, actually, to put what you just said into a little cartoon on YouTube. So whoever wants to do that, hey, open source idea, go for it. Damien, maybe we should do that for our producer. But that's really cool, and I think because so many people like when people hear Bitcoin, a lot of times they think of the price, they think of crypto. Okay, then maybe you get to the point where you're like, Bitcoin isn't a company, it's decentralized. And then people might start to get confused about okay, Bitcoin was created, and Bitcoin wasn't just created in 2008, 2009, and then okay, there's things that are maintained, there are updates that occurred, there are hard forks that happened. So once people go down that pipeline, it's really interesting. So do you think in terms of development culture, in terms of software development, do you think there's some people that would look at Bitcoin and say, wow, it's kind of a miracle that things get done in terms of these updates? Like how much of a unicorn is Bitcoin? Because I don't come from that world. So I am, because for me, it's kind of like, wow, there's no, like you said, there's no central authority. There's this really, really long development process. And I loved you saying it's similar to government work. I think that's so funny, saying Bitcoin is like government work. That's not exactly what you said, but that's just a funny soundbite. I won't make that a soundbite, but it's just a funny concept. Someone else can. Let's throw it out there. So how much of a unicorn from your development experience is Bitcoin, and the fact that year after year, these really important updates are made? And I'm not talking forks or things like that. That's kind of a different story, but how much of a unicorn is Bitcoin? Because it seems very intriguing to me that it still keeps chugging along in terms of the development culture.
So I don't have a lot of experience working with other open source projects, so I can't speak to those, but I think it's truly remarkable that it just keeps going, and it does just keep growing. And if you look at how the network has been live since, what was it, 2009? That's over 10 years. It's still going. It's not dead yet. It's incredible. And the fact that, like, I think part of it too is Bitcoin does attract really good talent because it's completely remote. You can work on it from wherever you are. It is a miracle that people are able to come to consensus on certain things. One thing that helps is there is actually an invite-only conference that they do a couple times a year. I think it's called Core Dev. And these people get together and they meet face to face, and they prioritize things. They talk about like what direction we want to go next, and it's always, conversations flow so much easier when you can actually understand the person behind the NIM. And I think that's helpful. But in my opinion, it's a huge unicorn. But again, I don't have a ton of expertise on like what other open source projects are out there.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. And I think this next topic I want to mention off of the conversation of development, it's a word that's being overused, thrown around so much in Bitcoin social media, Bitcoin, whatever, for people who care and listen, is ossify. And all of the loaded meaning we put into that word in terms of development. And a lot of this, just a TLDR for people, a lot of this is coming up because there are quite a few people. Let's say there's not two categories here, but let's say one is the most conservative approach. Bitcoin is digital gold. We want it sitting as in wealth, like in an ETF, or just sitting in cold storage. Like Bitcoin is solid gold, hard money, and that is its purpose. Then on a far other extreme, Bitcoin is an open database. It transfers data and information. It is a ledger. It is a database. And then you have all sorts of people in between. But some people have thrown around the word ossify, and they're like, there's no more development on Bitcoin. Stop doing Bitcoin development. Don't fund Bitcoin development. And then people are saying we should fund more Bitcoin development. And I think there's just so much like misinformation around that word and what development on Bitcoin means. So we've already obviously started talking about development on Bitcoin, and there's more than just Bitcoin Core now, and there's so many other tools in layer 2 and layer 3 on Bitcoin. But from your approach, I'll say a leading question in that, why is it important to support open source development on Bitcoin? And what does that mean? Like, does it mean, as some people think, okay, we're always looking for ways to change Bitcoin, or does it mean maintenance? Like, where is that line for you? And how do you feel hearing that word ossify thrown around a lot? I guess it's been more in the past few months, but it has its ebbs and flows.
I was thinking about it. I feel like I heard that term come up probably over a year ago. And I initially dismissed it because it sounded a little bit silly to me. And I'll say, because to me, ossify means a code freeze. We stop working on the code right now. We never, ever make any changes to it. And that is not a good idea. The number one obvious reason is because of security updates. If something were to happen, we want to be able to fix it and release a patch. But there's also a ton of maintenance that happens all the time. And I'm not even talking about I guess I'll start from the spectrum of like things you have to do. You have to do security updates, at least in my opinion. And then another thing that you probably have to do is the underlying hardware that people run Bitcoin on changes all the time. And Bitcoin, so when you're developing code, you will oftentimes bring in libraries, like bundles of other code that people wrote to help make writing your code a little bit easier. And to the credit of Bitcoin core developers, they do a really, really great job minimizing the amount of dependencies that they bring into the code base. But sometimes it's unavoidable. And sometimes those dependencies will come out with a new version. And maybe that new version says, hey, I know you were using this method, but we changed the name of it, or we broke it up into 2 methods, or we just don't support it anymore. Please update your version of this library that you're using, and please make the appropriate changes such that you're compatible with the new version. And you could say, I don't want to do that. I'm just going to use the old version. And that's fine, except at some point, enough new versions will have been released such that the maintainers of the dependency that you're using choose not to support anything past the most recent 3 updates. And so it's kind of the same thing. Like if that dependency has security updates that need to go in, you can only get those security updates in one of the newer versions. That's similar to if anyone's running Linux, you'll see something called LTS. That's long-term support, I think. And that basically means we promise to apply security updates for this version for at least 2 years or whatever. And so you get like some guarantee, but it doesn't mean you can run it forever. And another example of like how the word ossification doesn't do enough to talk about where the line is drawn is BIP 324 was recently added to Bitcoin Core, which adds encryption to the peer-to-peer network communications between nodes. We've been surviving this long without it, but I would argue that okay, so it's not a bug because nothing's broken. It could be considered a new feature. I think security enhancement might be like the better way to describe it. But in the ossification world, what does that mean? Does that mean we have to put encryption on our network communications, or is that like, oh no, we don't actually we don't really have to do it. It's like let's stay the course and like not change the code at all. So I just, when I initially heard ossification, I was very confused. Since then, though, after listening to some other people speak on it and kind of trying to understand their perspective, I think that both sides may have a little bit more in common, or they might have some middle ground that they don't realize, in that Bitcoin core development, like I mentioned earlier, it's slow because it's risk averse. It's slow because it's deliberate. It's slow because the devs are trying to make the right like long-term decision. There is a culture of doing it right the first time, and that's also another reason why the development cycles are very long. But it's often the case that if you didn't do something right the first time, in order to fix it later, it's like an order of magnitude more work. And actually, as I'm saying this right now, there's I think it's a 2106 bug. Do you know what I'm talking about? I hope I got the number right. In the year 2106, okay, in the year 2106 or whatever point in the future, the data structure that holds the timestamp for inside of the block header is just going to run out of digits. So that needs to be fixed. What does that mean in terms of ossification? Does that mean, is that an exception that we fix it with? And if you make one exception for something, what other exceptions are you going to make? So I don't believe in making a code freeze. I think there's a lot of maintenance to be done in Bitcoin all the time. But I do acknowledge the people, I have a soft spot for the people who are asking for ossification, because personally, I am a very conservative type of developer. I don't move fast and break things. I like to really like take my time and think things through. So I think they're asking the right questions. I think this is a good discussion to be having, but I don't think I don't think like true ossification will ever happen anytime soon. And Jameson Lopp actually did a talk on this, I think in like November or something. And he put it really well. He said that ossification should be a phenomenon, not a goal.
Hi, everyone. Hope you're enjoying the episode. Today's episode is brought to you by Bitbox. Now, Bitbox is a hardware wallet that's open source, incredibly secure and easy to use, and it's what I'm using to safely secure my Bitcoin in cold storage. Now, I know self-custodying Bitcoin can really be intimidating, but Bitbox is designed for ease of use without compromising on security. It's USB-C compatible and allows you to easily back up and restore your private keys with a micro SD card, which is really cool. Now, you can purchase the Bitbox using the promo code TPB at the link found in the show notes for 5% off your purchase. And I really want to thank Bitbox for their support of the podcast. All right, I'll let you get back to the episode now. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And it is 2106. Okay. There's many different ways to call it. The 2106 bug, the 2106 required hard fork, the 21 where technically the code will stop running based on the current code. I guess that's the way you can put it. Again, I'm not technical, so you can correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, so back to your point, obviously, I think once people dig into ossification for 30 seconds, they realize that word isn't quite appropriate for what we're talking about. It's really conservative. There's many different ways to talk about it. What do folks there's so many different ways it's so funny because there's so many different ways that folks are very sensitive about how you talk about Bitcoin. Yeah. But even though some Bitcoiners like, everyone's so sensitive, I'm like, some of you all are very sensitive about how we talk about Bitcoin. So don't lecture me too much here, but some people are, what they want Bitcoin to be or what they envision Bitcoin as. There's all of these things. And to some extent there's the folks that are like, we're going to use it and we're going to break things and we're going to push forward. And there's other folks that are saying it is meant to be blank. So then you get all these value things. So it's very complicated. So I think the ossify conversation is less of a technical term that they mean it in that way, and more of a, we want it as blank. Yep. And then other people saying that. But obviously people working on it, like you said, I think it's a good way to put it. You said kind of silly, like when you first use it as a term. It's not really the right term here, I don't think.
Yeah. I don't have a better word, but I agree. Yeah. So you had mentioned, and I don't know to what extent, a lot of people that get into Bitcoin, or a lot of people get into crypto, right? And there's still the vast majority of people in the real world conflate the two. And for me personally, there's so many different things going on that is an entirely separate conversation to really dig into, which we'll do a little bit here and on other episodes. There's so many things happening with, I view attacks on software development, attacks on open source development, on privacy tools, all these things. For me to get into or care about, it's Bitcoin, not crypto, and this and that. Like, yes, it is. And we're a Bitcoin only show, but there's so many people that are interested in both, that are interested in Bitcoin and crypto. There's regulation that applies to both currently in digital assets in the US. But you, from a developer perspective, you had mentioned blockchain and wanting to study blockchain. Could you speak on what you think is different about Bitcoin's security model or Bitcoin's approach with development compared to other cryptos? And I know you won't be able to, there's millions of cryptos, right? Yep.
But what do you think is the ethos? Because I'm curious as well, just hearing for you, of a Bitcoin developer versus another. And there are many people that have worked on various projects and multiple projects, right? There are a lot of people that are just interested in development and software development that I think is also probably not also talked about enough, and just interested in challenges. But what do you think sets apart Bitcoin for those that are like, how has Bitcoin been running this long? How is it so secure? Like, what is the code base like? Yeah. I think it'd be interested for them to hear from you on what makes it different.
I wish I had like a long, complicated answer, but for me, it's about the decentralized nature of Bitcoin. Like, there is no other project, especially in the crypto space, that is like this. A lot of other projects have foundations, they have founders, they have single points of failure that can effectively be used to take them down, and also single points of failure that can possibly serve as sources of censorship. Bitcoin is, to me, like truly for everyone. I mean, it's not perfect. We're always looking for ways to improve it. But I think what makes it unique is that like the creator walked away from it. It's been how many years and we still don't know who that person was. And now we are all Satoshi and we all get to share it. And I think that's a great thing. And I think it's something that like, I think that other cryptos shine in other areas. Actually, like some of them have wonderful educational resources, wonderful communities. But at the end of the day, I do believe that Bitcoin is the most technically sound of them all.
Yeah, I would agree, but running this show, I do agree with that. Yeah, I think it's just important for people to hear that and think about that. And again, as people come in, I don't want to say most people, but I know for me, like I wasn't into developing or anything like that, but I like held Bitcoin, Ethereum, a couple others, and then within a month or two, again, like I said, I think I was just more paranoid. I'm like, I don't know about Ethereum. I don't know. Like, I'm just going to focus on Bitcoin because also it seems the most technically sound and it seems the most legitimate. It seemed, as I started learning about it, I just was not interested in others. I think for me, where I come from, some people, again, this is just on social media, right? In my experience, it's kind of the 5% extremes on either side. This is my opinion. Many people might disagree. Is that we're treating some crypto like this complete enemy, this like horrible, horrible thing, this enemy. Now, what is different are scam projects, scam companies, scam people. That is different, and many, many, many cryptos are. They legitimately are, and you can see that. Some are not. I just think there's more points of failure that you're pointing to. There's more centralization risk. There's other things. That for me, I'm not as interested in.
Yeah. And I think that it really gets humanized when you meet other devs in those projects. For a long time, especially before the pandemic, a lot of the people involved in the Bitcoin and blockchain discussions in the Boston area were not solely Bitcoiners. I met a lot of really, really nice Ethereum developers who also hold Bitcoin, who I consider to be very good friends of mine. I'm just like not into the same things. And my understanding is actually that, and I'm sure a Bitcoin historian can come and correct me, but the idea of maximalism came from the fact that there's a lot of projects out there. There's a lot of things you could be doing, but you just choose to be spending the majority of your time in Bitcoin because you find that to be the most rewarding, it's the one that you're most attracted to. And you acknowledge that there are simply not enough hours in the day to be good at all of these things. So you can either be like a jack of all trades and a master of none, or you can like buckle down and focus on just one thing. Now, I know the word maximalism has kind of like evolved into like a whole different thing. But I like from the start, that was how I understood it. It's just like, it wasn't to bash other coins. It was just like, this is what I choose to spend my time on.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. I'm sure like someone like Jameson Lopp would probably agree with that. And he wrote a great essay on maximalism, maybe a year or two ago at this point. I can't really think, but yeah, that's a really great, like you're talking about a lot of things that a lot of people listening to Bitcoin podcasts, going on social media and seeing Bitcoin, you're talking about meeting people in real life, doing real work, like things that all of us should be doing no matter what our thing is, right? Like going to local Bitcoin meetups, like doing these different things are really important. I will say it's funny. I was at, this was over a year ago at PubKey down in New York City, popular Bitcoin bar now, all of this stuff. And there were so many Ethereum maxis there, like on this particular night. And I was talking about, Bitcoin and this and that. And they were like, yeah, I'm really into like Ethereum, and the nicest people. But it's so funny, some of their reasons, I can't even remember. We just kind of moved on to different conversations. But I remember being like, no, I don't agree with that at all. That's crazy. Like, I just like, remember being like, okay, cool. Anyway, cool. Did you guys see the game yesterday? Whatever, move on. But you're meeting people in real life and you're like, you see all of these like shit coins, this and that online. And then you meet some of these people for something like Ethereum, right? And again, don't hear what I'm not saying, people. I'm only into Bitcoin. I would only recommend people learning Bitcoin and this and that. But it is just, we have to kind of understand these things a little bit as well, and understand where people are coming at with different projects, and these aren't necessarily evil people that are
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
this dev work.
Yep.
But yeah, it's
Yeah.
just interesting to focus on.
Yeah, they're all people, and I think like DeFi is super popular. I'm not really into DeFi, but like if you look at reasons for why people like want to invest their time in that, it's not malicious at all. Like maybe they have family overseas and they're sick of sending like paying for the wire fees and stuff. And like yeah, I can't explain why certain people choose certain technologies, but I think the reasons for why they're choosing to work on certain things, like it shouldn't be judged without asking more questions.
Yeah, I completely agree. Now I want to segue our conversation into stuff that I really focus on and enjoy. Like I really am pretty laser focused in terms of just the things I read, the things I try to advocate for as like Bitcoin for as a tool and Bitcoin tools for everyone who needs it, especially in really hard circumstances like authoritarian regimes, privacy preserving, all of these things, and making that the norm, talking about it in ways that pushing up against regulators that might insist in the future that that is illegal, and saying in the United States that is legal. We're talking about privacy. Privacy is not a crime. I had watched the MIT Bitcoin Expo and the panel you were on with Lop, and there were some conversations in that which I'll link that as well because I think that was really a good conversation. So not to fully rehash all of that, but I know we're talking about dev work and things like that, but well, what are some of your thoughts on just the recent events of regulatory attacks on privacy, on coin joins, on this is open source software, but certain folks and companies, from the way I understand it, are facilitating this. That some folks are like, is Lightning next? Because Lightning is you're using some of their code, you're using an app to open your own channels and handle your own funds and payments and things like that. But it's a bit of a scary time out there in terms of this. I think a lot of things we'll see play out in our legal system for, gosh, probably years to come on some of these different things. But I know you spoke on this a lot. So talk to people about why you think privacy preserving tools on Bitcoin and Bitcoin tools are so important, and combating some of that FUD of like, well, what do you have to hide? Why are we encouraging privacy tools in the first place?
Yeah. I mean, I first off, I agree. It's just a little bit scary to see this news coming out. I don't know much about politics to be able to like call any bluffs anywhere. So yeah, I'm a little bit concerned. I think that too, once you get deep enough into Bitcoin, and you like you forget about the before times, the before Bitcoin times, you forget about to look up and look around you. But like Bitcoin is so optimistic. Bitcoin is hope. We have such a bright future with it. And I think that's something that we should keep in mind. But then again, like, yeah, when you pop your head up and then you look around, there's a lot of education that needs to be done in terms of just being early about people who just don't know a lot about it. But I think the harder thing, and I think this is work that you do really well on, is combating some really negative pictures that have been painted about Bitcoin by the people who stand to lose if it succeeds. So what I will say about the current events is that one, we have a lot of reasons to just be excited about Bitcoin and privacy. We have a lot of stuff coming down the pipeline. Payjoin is one of them that we can talk about. Chaumian Mint, so that's your cashew, that's your Fedi Mint. Silent payments, which is basically you can provide an on-chain address, but then silently receive payments that can't be like tracked the typical blockchain analysis way. And then Join Markets, I think is the name of it, where it's basically like a distributed Coinjoin. Those are all things that are like really excited to be about. They're all types of like open source, decentralized technologies. And my understanding about Bitcoin, Lightning, and then even things like Payjoin is they are like software communications are protected as freedom of speech. So you could have the Apple Store or the Android Play Store remove wallets that support privacy technology because of whatever reason. But it's you can still obtain that code elsewhere. You could even publish it to a book. They can do things to make it more difficult, but I think Bitcoiners are pretty resilient, and I think that we can we'll continue to double down on why privacy is important, why it's meaningful. And we're pretty much done potty training my son. He's 2 years old, and he understands privacy though. Like when he's potty training, he's like, "Mom, can you close the door for some privacy, please?" Like he gets it, and I think that a lot of people might confuse privacy with secrecy, which is not necessarily like there's not anything wrong with that either. But I don't think they realize how often we use privacy every single day. Like our houses have doors on them. If you're planning a surprise party for a friend, the fact that you didn't tell them, that you withheld that information, is because you want it to be private. So privacy is not something that criminals use. And I don't think that we should be allowing the government to bully us or gaslight us into thinking that we don't want it or we don't need it. Like it's something that we use all the time.
Yeah, it's so true. And that's one of the biggest things that I try to combat, because I think a lot of people, and I can't stress this enough, it's usually just an education thing or an ignorance thing, in my opinion, of the normal average day, everyday person. Like before coming into Bitcoin, I wasn't thinking, oh, we should not have privacy. We should not have, it was more like people just go about their lives. They just don't know about it. They don't know about the benefits of like a VPN or the benefits of private transaction. They use a bank account. They use a, Cash App, whatever. And there's some laws around privacy with like bank accounts and things you send, right? But there's still leaks, there's still hacks, there's still ways the government can access these things and shut these things down in ways that are not necessarily fair or not great. So again, just hammering home the point of privacy is not criminal, and there are many lawmakers and regulators that are either directly or indirectly suggesting that, and that's what I take a problem with as a person who cares about human rights, but also as someone who's in the United States, as someone who's in a developed nation and democracy where these are things that we should be comfortable saying out loud, like, no, that's not okay. Like, that's not okay. Rather than, because we're also not trying to advocate for, okay, let's do this like back channel secret thing and let's do this and that. It's like, no, everything we're saying is like normal and not criminal, right?
Yeah.
The funniest thing I found, because a lot of this is in reference to the Samurai case, where for those that don't know, there's many different articles on it. It's a Coinjoin service, and the developers were arrested for money laundering. There's all sorts of different charges the Department of Justice placed against the developers of this. And the developers had also posted some things on social media, kind of mocking and suggesting, that so-and-so types of people or potentially Russian oligarchs can use our service and things like this, right? So the DOJ was kind of like, hey, you're enticing people to use your service, all of this, right? So there's some politics at play of the personalities that were running that said service, but their open source code that their service was facilitating, that is the part of whether it, of coin joins, of privacy enhancing tools on Bitcoin, of code, that we just want to make sure we keep an eye on, that they're not encroaching on that. If they want to encroach on individuals and find proof that an individual helped a criminal or terrorist use a serve, that's a different story. That's kind of a hand-holding, showing, actually doing a crime. So it's important to keep hitting home the point, in my view, that, what's funny in that case, they also said, I forget what they thought, like 100 million or certain amount of millions were routed through the service. My first thought was, well, if you knew how much money was routed through the service, why didn't you go after the people then? Why are you going after the service or the code? Right? It's kind of like, oh my gosh. And then people have put out funny memes. It's kind of like, oh my gosh, since, bad people use a computer, like we should just stop selling laptops, stop selling cell phones, stop like the pans and the wires. Oh, there's too many to keep track of. But very long-winded response for privacy is not a crime. And I think it's just about showing people in very cushy environments, very comfortable environments, that if you're attacking privacy tools, what you're suggesting and telling people is that privacy is a crime. And there are certain places where they are actually putting people to death and arresting people for privacy, like human rights activists, like a lot of people that we've had on this show that I connect to offline as well. that are saying the US government sending messages like this is really alarming,
Mhm.
because then dictators will get their hands on these surveillance tools and then prosecute criminals, and they'll think, well, the US is, prosecuting criminals. Maybe our charges aren't as harsh as like a public, death sentence in another country, but they'll say, well, the US is prosecuting it, so we are too. So there's all sorts of huge ramifications in my mind for this.
Yeah. I do, on a lighter note, so I want to make privacy cool again, but the irony in that is like, in order to make it cool, you're not being very private. like if you're advertising something. But like, I feel like social media has brought about kind of like a weird, it's very egocentric, with like all the influencer culture. Like, I think that kind of normalized showing every part of your day, every part of your life, even if it was a lie. And you don't have to live like that. You don't have to do that. You're perfectly entitled to your digital privacy. But then, like, we're also, especially in Bitcoin, we see like all kinds of NIMs popping up because, and some people actually say, like, if you're going to work on open source Bitcoin, do it under a NIM, don't do it under your actual name, which I think is good advice if you feel like it applies to you. But then on the other side of that is, if you want to be able to promote privacy, but to spread the word about privacy, to spread the word about Bitcoin, people are more likely to listen to you if they know you're like an actual person. So there's a little bit of like tension there, but I think that also means like there's room for everybody to kind of help spread awareness on Bitcoin, on self-custody, on privacy, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's a tough line to tell, because I can understand both arguments. I mean, before I came into Bitcoin, first of all, I'm not a developer. I'm not building anything. I do this podcast and I write things and I talk to people. I didn't know anything about that coming into Bitcoin, in terms of the use of my name, but also with what I'm doing. I feel comfortable doing it and having people, know my name. I talk a little bit about my background and my work, different things like that, like meeting people in person. But for developers and others, it is such a shame too that people have to feel. So there's so many reasons to go under a NIM, but just escalated reasons with recent development, that's just not okay to me. That's a shame that's kind of where we're at. And again, my hope is that all of this is overblown. That a lot of the things we're talking about don't really see the light of the day, and it's a lot of empty words and empty things, just politicking, and that courts decide certain things, just basic tenets of code of speech and privacy preserving is upheld. But the fact that we're having to have these conversations, and that I've seen certain people, what I don't want conflated is like, okay, DOJ arrests Bitcoin developers, and then it makes Bitcoin seem like this shady project thing and all of this, when it's not, right? But the challenging part is, like, there are authoritarian regimes, or possibly even the US, that sometimes say something is criminal that's not necessarily morally correct. We see this in authoritarian regimes all the time. So privacy preserving tech in those environments and using Bitcoin, even if they say it is illegal, it is a moral imperative for some people. So that's tricky.
And there's just a lot of criminal activity that happens with cash. we don't say like cash developer arrested. And then, but even it's not like, there's a side of privacy too that's security related. Like, you just don't know what somebody's going to do with a certain piece of information about you or your family. So I think there's like a very compelling case to be made there for the want of privacy. And kind of going to that, there were several Bitcoin developers that Craig Wright was fighting in court. And I think some of them even had NIMs that he managed to track down. But it's not even just to protect yourself from the government. It's just to protect yourself from other people in situations like that.
Yeah, that's so true. And obviously, our target audience is trying to talk to progressives in the left and folks that, let's say in general, look a bit more towards the government on certain things, whether it's funding, whether it's spending, or their representative who they might like. Maybe they like who's in charge in a certain matter of time or something like that. So that's one thing, which also to me is alarming, because I say this to progressives all the time. What if Donald Trump wanted to do an executive order that targeted a group or something, or you as an individual or a community. We can't have things hinge on political leaders and these kind of
Yeah.
decisions
Yep.
for privacy. Like, it should be standard for everyone in so many ways. But also, we're talking about like corporations and companies and individuals, right? So when you require that everything is KYC'd in certain regards, when you require funds are held by certain things, that can also be weaponized against you. There might be a cyber attack on that corporation, but then your data is leaked. We're seeing that all the time. There are all sorts of like, this medical institute's data was leaked. This corporation, Apple here, Google here, like it happens all the time. And so it's not just attack from government surveillance. It's also like corporate leaks or bad actor leaks that could affect you or affect your funds. It's so many things.
Yeah. And wasn't there, I'm not following it too closely, but a proposal that just came out, I hope you know what I'm talking about, where it basically says any coins that have touched a Coinjoin or a mixer are, I don't know, effectively illegal.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know where that stands right in this moment, but yes, because and I believe that is the same proposal that would like to ban any Coinjoin mixing. I forgot the exact language if they use, and mixing and coin joining are also two different things, but they're different proposals that are kicking around to basically say Coinjoin's bad, privacy on Bitcoin bad, don't use it. Also, if you spend it, it can't engage with the traditional financial system. So there's multiple different tiers that they're probably going to work through and try to figure something out. It might not ever see the light of day either with the composition of the House currently, but you are right. There are people that are proponents of that.
So what happens, in Bitcoin, there's something, and probably other cryptos too, called a dust attack, where you send a very, very small amount of Bitcoin, usually an amount that's so small that makes getting rid of it a headache. Like you spend more in fees if it even hits like the minimum size. So what happens if somebody has a mixed coin and then they break it into like 100 little pieces of dust, UTXOs, and then they dust all these exchanges, all these ETFs? Suddenly, legislation like that, what happens? Are those assets now freezed? Like, it's
unenforceable. And I saw a lot of people post on X about that. Like Lola did. I think there was like there's so many others that posted about the absurdity of this, right? About like especially the ETFs that made their addresses public and not traceable, but just to verify that they hold the Bitcoin that they say they hold, those kind of things. It's completely unenforceable. So again, it's back to the education point, how important this is for lawmakers to realize you can't legislate air like this. You know what I mean? That's kind of the level we're talking about.
Yeah.
For me, I think it's a lot of scare tactics and politicking. And coincidentally enough, the name of our show is The Progressive Bitcoiner. And it's not because we want to politicize Bitcoin. It's because Bitcoin has become politicized. We're trying to encourage it is not this political thing. And it's also something that progressives and the left, that the majority of a lot of these people that are doing these type of things, unfortunately, are the Democratic Party right now. So we're trying to encourage like just a lack of education. They're politicking too much. And we're going to see this more and more this year, unfortunately. And hopefully at some point, it's just not.
Yeah. One of my favorite things, like, I happen to be one of the least persuasive people to ever exist. And so I kind of lean back on leading by example, because nobody like enjoys being preached at. And so one thing that I enjoy about the work that you do and the work of other people in the space is kind of just like talking to regular people and showing them that, like you said, Bitcoin's not like a right or a left issue. Like Bitcoin's actually for everyone. And I'm friends with like a lot of local moms around here now. And I told one of them who works in investment banking that I worked in Bitcoin. And she didn't like give me a look, but I think she was thinking in her head, like, you're a weirdo. And I am.
Let's keep an eye on this house over here. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And I am, but not in the way that she thinks I am. And I think enough time has passed such that like she's kind of, I hope to have like pushed her opinion of Bitcoiners in a different direction after that. But I think like if it's within like your OPSEC like rules for yourself, if you're comfortable with it, kind of just lightly speaking about Bitcoin, lightly normalizing privacy to regular people around you, especially ones that don't know about Bitcoin, can go a long way.
Yeah, I think so. And that's what people need to see, because so many people, I mean, back to you were talking about influence culture or influencer culture and things like that, which I think is great to suggest like, oh, the scary reality of like not enough people care about privacy. But you know, just so many people living their lives and where they get information, things like that on social media, and just seeing the perception of something rather than seeing the point where I think we need to get to and where I think we're headed is, you know, for me, a bit more of an aggressive term, but I think Bitcoin will eat the world in a lot of ways, like in every industry, every facet of money and technology, and so many different areas. I mean, even the way it's been engaging with energy markets the past couple of years is fascinating, and not many people would have seen that. So it's going to be such a normal thing. And I remember when I was first doing this podcast and getting into it a little bit more, you know, my wife had kind of turned to me and asked, like, if it's just money, which again, we can get into what Bitcoin is, but you know, a large purpose of Bitcoin is a money or medium of exchange. She's like, if it's just money, then why is this so political? Like, I don't get it. I'm like, that's what I hope we get to. Is like, if it's just code, if it's so we need to talk about the tools, the use cases. We try to do a lot on this podcast, the stories of people using it, what that looks like. Like, okay, whether it's people keeping in their retirement accounts, whether it's people using it in a circular economy in Kenya, whether it's, you know, so many different use cases, just talking about that, because then it de-escalates, right? Because a lot of people just come in hot with any issue. It's not just Bitcoin. It's not unique to Bitcoin. And they just they think of something, they want to fight. And I've experienced this too, whether it's from the right or the left in terms of my work in Bitcoin. And a lot of times I just kind of learn to calmly just keep moving forward and just, hey, it's okay. Just talk about the positive stories, just do your thing. It just de-escalates people. So making it a normal interaction, talking about what you do in Bitcoin, and you know, not apologizing for it either, not being like, yeah, I do stuff in Bitcoin. I know that's weird, or you know, I it's not like that. Just talking about it normal and see what happens.
I actually really love that analogy of like, it is just money. It is just better money. Because at least I never learned where money came from. I never learned where the US dollar came from. I never learned how it worked. And I suspect a lot of other people don't. And, you know, maybe it's very complicated. Like, I don't necessarily want to learn this. But I did see a question posted to you on nostr about teaching financial
literacy. I was going to get to that before.
Do you mind if I get into it?
No, go for it. Absolutely.
Because I
shout out to Daniel. He Daniel works on our show. Everyone's heard me mention before. So,
well, thank you, Daniel. That's a wonderful question. It came to my mind because I actually have spoken at a high school in the Boston area. It was a charter school about Bitcoin. It was really cool. I think it was a junior high age level, 6th, 7th graders, and
if you don't mind, Stacey, I'm gonna read the actual question.
Okay.
So Daniel had said, how should schools design a curriculum to teach about Bitcoin and its role in financial literacy? And what would you say to parents, teachers, and administrators who don't realize its importance for future generations?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So when I guess one depends on the age level that you're speaking with, but I think something that is just so cool is the history of money. Like, not even how the US dollar works, but like other types of currencies that we've had in the past, the island of Yap stones or seashells, and then you got your gold and your silver. And it's really cool to kind of ask, I'm going to talk about my personal experience, like ask the kids, what's good money? Is a basket of apples good money? You can eat it, but it rots. Like, or would you rather have something like gold, or would you rather have cash that has been issued by a government? And these kids got it. They got it right away. And maybe it's because they haven't grown up in the same, I guess they haven't grown up. They haven't grown up to like really use money in the real world yet. So they don't have certain limitations that we might have in our heads about what money is and how it works. So I think that one, just like for starters, is talking about history of money, what makes good money, what makes bad money, is just a great activity for anyone to do. And then you can obviously get into like more specific things. But I think I saw another reply in there too about taking it upon yourself to teach your children. I think that that actually is very good, very responsible advice. You shouldn't wait for someone else, because there are a lot of situations, especially that we see in Bitcoin, where you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And so you can have the most compelling arguments, but for whatever reason, teachers, the administration, whoever is in charge doesn't want to see it through. Or maybe they think that other things are more important, and maybe they are to them. But I would be willing to wager that like a lot of like the wealthy families out there in the world teach their children financial literacy because they know it's important for their own future. So if you don't feel like the educational system, whatever system your children are in right now, is doing a good enough job, take in your own hands, have them open up a lemonade stand and accept Bitcoin for it. Like there's nothing to lose in teaching them these skills.
Yeah, and that was Burns on Nostr who left that comment. And for those listening, we're doing a little bit more, trying to pull a little bit people more into Nostr, which I've talked a lot about on the show, and highly recommend like Primal or Damus. But we've been posting, like when I go to record an episode, I'll post and say the top zaps get read out, and then as well as questions. So folks for future episodes as well have questions. We'll always post on Nostr, and you can leave questions for that guest of the day. So thanks, Daniel and Burns, for doing that. The last question I'll ask you, and then leave it to you if there's anything else you wanted to say, is when thinking about your own kids, your own kind of future of, you really care a lot about Bitcoin education, about the development work, about seeing Bitcoin, for me, like live its full potential in life. What do you think that world could look like for the future generation with Bitcoin, in terms of like an optimistic view of, because you've mentioned several times already on this episode that Bitcoin is hope, Bitcoin is better money, Bitcoin is all these things, which I agree with. So when you look to like your kids' future, what does that look like for you with what Bitcoin could do?
Yeah. So if you had asked me this question 5 or 6 years ago, I would have told you, well, obviously we're going to have, what's it, like the Super Bowl run, or I don't know what they're calling it, super moon, when like Bitcoin just skyrockets in price, number go up so high. We're all like,
we're going to be at $3 million by
we
today.
All have girlfriends like, oh, it's so great. We live on a Bitcoin standard. That's what I would have said. But I think that now, especially as we're seeing more adoption, I really hope to see a world where we are in a Bitcoin standard. But I don't necessarily see fiat going away, but I do potentially see fiat and other types of currencies backed by Bitcoin. I'm very hopeful about something like that, because obviously Bitcoin has a supply cap. I think that's probably one of the most important reasons why you would want it. But then I would also, I really hope that, well, I hope for a couple of things. One, I hope that we won't be talking about Bitcoin at all when my kids are grown up, because it's boring. It's just like, it just works. It just does what it does.
Yes.
And that's going to be a weird time. I do feel like I'm going to be old one day and just like look back on this time where there were tons of people just so like tons of people that made Bitcoin their personality. And I'm probably guilty of that myself. But I just don't, I hope that that's like going to be like a very small amount of people later on, because it's not going to be a big deal. The money will, be fixed. But the one thing that I do hope will continue, and I'll be very concerned if it doesn't, is I want to see self-custody continue, and I want to see regular people still able to transact through Bitcoin. Now, how is kind of a different story, and maybe there are different layers to that. And I know that that is often a source of discussion, actually, when we talk about what some people might mean when they mean ossification. But I do think that there are going to always be situations where people will need to use the asset of Bitcoin itself, not something that's pegged to it, not a derivative of it. specifically where you talk about people in authoritarian regimes or places where they don't have the kinds of financial freedoms and privileges that we have here. And when you talk about the ways that people feel about Bitcoin right now, I think too, and this was also true for me, I never acknowledged the financial privilege that I had living here in the US, and how I don't really have to be worried about my bank closing my account. But that's not the case for people all over the world.
Yeah, 100%. And I hope people will, I think people coming into Bitcoin and learning and trying to see more about it, there are more and more articles, podcasts, films, just educational materials showing that, okay, even if you don't need it or don't need to use it, even if your bank account gets shut down, like you mentioned, sometimes it's a technical error. Sometimes, okay, they might want to shut it down because of you. You go and open another bank account in the US, right? It's not as tricky as some other places.
Yep.
There's more and more material saying, okay, even if you don't need it, please understand how other people can and are and will use it around the world.
Yeah.
That's really important. And Alex Gladstein, I'm sure he didn't coin it, but just hearing the most from him, like check your financial privilege, as well as his book. And Anita Posh and so many others talking about this. I too hope that. I just would like to see Bitcoin be used in whatever ways people need to in the future, with tools readily available. I hope that we can chat again in the far distant future, and that it's back in the day we talked about Bitcoin core development and ossification and politicians disagreeing, kind of like maybe people on the early internet, and how silly that would be to look back.
I love that.
So that's my hope. Yeah. Well, Stacey, this was such a fun conversation. I'm glad we got to do this. We'll definitely have to do it again sometime soon. But before we jump off, do you want to send people anywhere in terms of where to follow you, where to connect with you? Like I said, we'll have your website and stuff, but anywhere you want to direct people to.
I mean, Stacie.dev, SATSIE.dev. You can find all the ways to find me on there, and trying to use nostr a little bit more these days, just because X isn't fun. Sorry to say, but I mean, that's how we connected, is nostr. So something good already came out of it. But thank you for having me.
I go all over the place. I try to be a little bit of everywhere for this podcast. I joked with someone recently. I think it was Freddie New on an episode last week. I was like, technically we have a TikTok. I'm not crazy about TikTok. I don't want to be on TikTok, but I post a couple of clips from our show on TikTok. I don't like engage, but technically it's there. I'm like, normies are on Instagram and TikTok. We have Instagram and TikTok accounts on there. So
I think that's smart.
Anyway, Stacey, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure having you on.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed it.